Imagine a stretch of cracked, white ground, the floor of a lake that dried up thousands of years ago. The wind has scoured it flat. It looks like nothing. And then someone looks closer and sees something that stops the breath: footprints. Human footprints. Bare feet, pressed into what was once soft mud at the edge of the water, and then buried, preserved, and frozen in time for longer than our written history has existed. You can see the toes. You can see the arch. In some of them, you can see where the heel slipped a little in the wet ground. They are unmistakably, achingly human. Someone walked here. And here is the part that turned a quiet discovery into one of the most explosive findings in modern archaeology. When scientists carefully worked out how old these footprints were, the number that came back was impossible. Not impossible like aliens or lost super civilizations, impossible like, according to everything we had taught for nearly a century, there should not have been a single human being standing on this ground when these prints were made. These footprints were thousands of years too early. And to understand why a few marks in the mud sent a shock through an entire scientific field, why some experts called it a revolution and others refused to believe it, you have to understand the rule that these footprints appear to break. A rule that, for decades, was treated as simple, settled fact. For most of the 20th century, there was a clean, confident answer to one of the biggest questions in human history: when did people first arrive in the Americas? The answer had a name. It was called Clovis First. The story went like this. At the end of the last ice age, around 13,000 years ago, a people we call the Clovis culture, named for the distinctive stone spear points they left behind, crossed from Asia into North America over a land bridge that existed when sea levels were lower. They came through a gap in the great ice sheets, spread across the continent, and they were the first. The very first humans in the New World. It was an elegant, satisfying story. It had a clear mechanism, the land bridge, exposed when so much of the world's water was locked into glacier that the sea level fell and bared a broad plain between the continents. It had a signature artifact, those beautiful, fluted spear points, turning up at site after site. And it had a clean beginning, a single moment in time you could point to and say, it started here. Tidy stories are powerful, and this one was very tidy. This wasn't a fringe idea. For decades, it was the consensus, taught in universities, printed in textbooks, defended by some of the most respected names in the field. It was so dominant that it became almost a wall. If you were an archaeologist who claimed to have found evidence of humans in the Americas before Clovis, before that 13,000-year line, your career could suffer for it. Your sites were doubted, your dating questioned, your reputation put on the line. The timeline wasn't just a theory. It was a boundary, policed by the weight of an entire establishment. And that is the wall these footprints walked straight through. Because the layers they were buried in were dated not to 13,000 years, but to somewhere around 21 to 23,000 years ago, pushing the human story in the Americas back by nearly 10,000 years in a single discovery. Now, the natural question, the right question, the one the skeptics immediately asked, is this: how could anyone possibly know that footprints are 20,000 years old? Footprints don't come with a date stamped on them. And this is where the discovery becomes genuinely clever, because the answer is that you don't date the footprints. You date what's around them. The footprints were sealed in layers of sediment, and in those layers, mixed into the ancient mud, were the seeds of a small aquatic plant, a grass that grew along the shoreline of that long-vanished lake. Those seeds, like all living things, contain a kind of natural clock, radiocarbon, which decays at a known, steady rate after a plant dies. By measuring how much of that radiocarbon was left in the seeds found above and below the prints, scientists could bracket the footprints in time. The prints had to be younger than the layer beneath them and older than the layer on top. And the seeds in both directions pointed to the same staggering range, roughly 21 to 23,000 years ago. That means these people were walking along this lake not after the Ice Age, as the old model demanded, but in the depths of it, at the height of the last glacial maximum, when massive ice sheets still locked up much of the northern world. Picture what that actually means. Whoever left these prints was not strolling through a mild, easy landscape. They were surviving in a cold, demanding Ice Age world, a world of mammoths and giant ground sloths and dire wolves, beside the shore of a desert lake, at a time when much of the continent to the north lay buried under ice nearly a mile thick. To even be standing on that mud, they had to have arrived by some route, at some time, that the old textbook insisted was sealed shut. According to Clovis first, that was flatly impossible. There was no way through. The ice gap hadn't opened yet. And yet, here were the footprints, in the mud, with the clock built right into the sediment around them. You might think that evidence this striking would be welcomed with open arms. It wasn't, and that resistance is actually one of the most important and healthy parts of this whole story. When the dates were first published, a wave of skepticism came rolling in, and not from cranks. From serious scientists. Their objection focused on those very seeds. The plant in question is an aquatic one, and there's a known problem with dating water plants. They can absorb older, dead carbon dissolved in the lake water, which can make them appear older than they really are. It's called the reservoir effect, and it's a genuine concern. If the seeds were giving a falsely ancient reading, the whole revolution could collapse. So the original team did exactly what good science demands. They went back and tried to date the site a second and a third way, using completely different materials and methods that don't suffer from that same water carbon problem. They dated ancient pollen. They used a separate technique that measures how long buried mineral grains had been hidden from sunlight. And the independent methods, using entirely different clocks, landed in the same window, around 21 to 23,000 years. When several different dating methods, with different weaknesses, all point to the same answer, the case becomes very hard to dismiss. The footprints had survived the trial. And slowly, the field began to absorb something it had resisted for decades. The wall had a hole in it, and people had been on the other side of that wall long before anyone thought possible. Here's what's important to understand: the footprints didn't win this argument alone. They were the most vivid, most human piece of a much larger puzzle that had been quietly building for years. Because the truth is, hints of a pre-Clovis presence had been turning up for a long time: stone tools, butchered animal bones, traces of campsites at scattered sites across the Americas that stubbornly dated older than 13,000 years. For a long time, each of these could be argued away one at a time. Maybe that date was contaminated. Maybe those tools were just naturally broken rocks. Maybe that one site was a fluke. But as the pile of evidence grew, explaining it all away became harder and harder. The footprints were the moment the pile became a mountain, because footprints are almost impossible to argue with. A stone could be a coincidence of nature. A date could be an error. But a trail of bare human feet, walking along a lake shore, is unambiguous. A person was here. And if people were in the heart of North America 20,000 years ago, it forces us to rethink the entire route they took to get here. They couldn't have come through an ice-free corridor that didn't exist yet. Which is why many researchers now favor a different path entirely, that the first Americans may have moved south along the Pacific coastline, traveling by the shore, perhaps even by boat, hugging the edge of the continent long before any inland gap opened. Along that coast, the idea goes, ran a ribbon of life: rich shallows, kelp forests, seals, and fish and shellfish, a kind of marine highway that could feed small bands of people as they pushed steadily south, boat by boat, generation by generation. It is a slower, quieter, more seafaring picture of the first Americans than the old image of big game hunters marching through an inland gap with spears. And it fits a set of footprints by a lake, deep in the Ice Age, far better than the tidy story ever did. An entire chapter of human migration we had barely imagined, written, in part, by a few footprints in the mud. So has the human timeline been rewritten? In an honest sense, yes, and in an equally honest sense, the story is still being written, and that's exactly as it should be. The footprints have pushed the confident, decades-old Clovis first wall into history. The idea that no one set foot in the Americas before 13,000 years ago is, for a great many scientists, simply no longer tenable. But science doesn't replace one wall with another overnight. There are still researchers testing, questioning, probing the dates, and that ongoing argument is not a weakness, it's the immune system of knowledge doing its job. What's not really in doubt anymore is the deepest point of all, that our certainty was misplaced. For nearly a century, one of the foundational facts of human prehistory was taught as settled, defended as obvious, and used to dismiss anyone who disagreed. And it turned out that the real story was older, stranger, and braver than the textbook allowed, a story of people surviving in a frozen world at the very edge of human endurance, thousands of years before we gave them credit for being there at all. That's the quiet lesson buried in those footprints. Not just that the timeline changed, but that a timeline can change, that settled history is often just the current chapter, waiting for the right discovery to turn the page. And there is something almost unbearably moving about the form this revolution took. It wasn't a golden artifact or a lost city. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, a person, walking. A child, maybe, judging by the size of some of the prints, splashing along the edge of a lake, leaving marks in the mud without a thought, 20,000 years ago. They had no idea they were walking through the middle of a debate that wouldn't begin for 200 centuries. They were just alive, on an ordinary day, in a world of ice. And they left us the most human message imaginable, not words, not monuments, but footsteps, saying, simply, we were here, earlier than you ever believed. So I'll leave you with this. If a few footprints in the mud can overturn a fact that was taught as certain for 100 years, how much of what we know about our deep past is really just the latest chapter, waiting to be rewritten? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every single one.